Welcome, everyone, to the International Conference on Consciousness-Based Leadership and Management. Today is day 2. This is session number 8. It's a keynote conversation on transcendental approaches to oneness and flourishing. We have an outstanding panel with Dr. David Orme-Johnson as keynote speaker, and Dr. Fred Travis and Dr. Carla Brown. My name is Anil Maheshwari. I'll be a moderator. So at this point, we want to begin because everybody's joining from different places, with different energies. So we'd like to spend 5 minutes doing some kind of contemplation or reflection or meditation. And so please sit back, relax. You can close your eyes. Use whatever practice or technique you're comfortable with. And just try to connect with yourself to be here and now. And don't worry about the time. I'll let you know when 5 minutes are over. Thank you. Thank you. So, as you saw, we have a great panel, and this is an intentional conference. So this is all about trying to find a path to a flourishing humanity. So that's how we've assembled some of the greatest researchers on consciousness, on transcendence at Maharishi International University or associated with us. So we will have Dr. Orme-Johnson go first, then Dr. Fred Travis will talk about transcendence and neuroscience, and Dr. Carla Brown will talk about transcendence and how it can help the world moving forward. So Dr. Orme-Johnson, would you please, you can show your charts.
Yes, thank you, Anil. And thank you for organizing this great conference, getting together people from all over the world to talk about transcendence. So let me start, share screen here.
Yes, please.
See my slides, I hope.
Yes, you could just go in full screen mode. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Perfect.
So I'm going to speak on transcendental approaches to oneness and flourishing. And at Maharishi International University, transcendence has a specific meaning. It means transcending the active thinking mind to experience transcendental consciousness, samadhi, the unified field of natural law. And then in this diagram, I show what happens during TM, Transcendental Meditation, compared with other major modes of meditation that are available in the world today, mindfulness and other meditations like focused attention. Transcending means going from the active mind, illustrated by this wavy level here, that's like thinking, the mind, the thoughts becoming quieter and quieter and quieter until jumping off the most quietest level, one experiences pure consciousness, bliss consciousness, the unified field of natural law. And what everybody in the world needs to know about transcendence is that we all have this infinite potential, this infinite field of consciousness at the basis of our own minds. So what I'm going to do is show you some research showing how valuable experiencing that is to our personal lives and to society as a whole. There have been over 650 scientific papers on transcendental meditation, which have been collected in this volume, 8 volumes of collected papers. The research was conducted in over 300 universities and research universities in 30 countries, and it's been published in 219 peer-reviewed journals and books. If anyone's interested in this research, there's a great website you can see at the bottom here called researchtm.net. And at researchtm.net, you can search by area of research, author, year, journal type, and find out what's in these volumes. One of the main things that happens during TM is increased coherence of brain functioning. Transcending during TM increases alpha-1 EEG coherence in the frontal areas of the brain, which is known to increase creativity, intelligence, and so forth. So this diagram illustrates that. Here we have our meditator. And when you're increasing coherence in this executive frontal part of the brain, then we find that that's associated with experiences of transcendental consciousness, greater self-awareness, inner orientation, improved neurological efficiency, a whole host of benefits, increased moral reasoning, creativity, intelligence, learning ability, grade point average, and also decreases negative emotional problems like it decreases anxiety and neuroticism, and it increases emotional stability. So for any executive, obviously having coherence in the executive part of the brain is a very powerful way to improve your leadership. And here's one study, for example, in business and industry. This was done in the frozen foods industry, and it found that those who learned TM increased on inspiring a shared vision, modeling the way, and enabling others to act, encouraging the heart, challenging the process, all aspects of good leadership. And the interesting thing in this study is that not everybody in the business learned TM, but the whole business became, outside observers said, became more alert, less tired, and more focused and less worried. Now, another effect of TM is that it improves health in every category of disease. This is a study I did and looking at health insurance statistics on 2,000 meditators over a 5-year period. And the result is that TM reduced hospitalization in all categories of disease on average by a 50% across categories. You might ask, well, how can one thing have an effect on everything? And it's just because of this unique kind of coherent rest where the brain is completely connected, the physiology is very integrated, that the healing processes are very efficient. So the body is wired to detect and get rid of stresses, to create balance. That's the whole idea of homeostasis. And what TM does is it provides this extra kind of coherent rest in which these self-repair mechanisms are activated. So when you sit to meditate, no matter what's in balance, the body will naturally try to find that and will work on launching mechanisms to rebalance it. So that's the reason that you get improved health in all categories of disease. And interestingly, the biggest reductions in both hospitalization and doctor visits are for older people. So TM is very good in reducing the aging process, and studies on the elderly have found that it increases the memory, and it reduces heart disease and heart attacks, and that they live longer, increased longevity. Now, one of the effects of TM is that the physiology shows it's just the opposite of stress. So we're all familiar with this picture on the left, and this is what happens during TM. This is a meta-analysis of 32 studies. A meta-analysis is a way to systematically draw conclusions, quantitative conclusions on a body of research. And what this study showed was a comparison of what happens during transcendental meditation on these various stress markers compared with just sitting with your eyes closed. And the meditators showed over twice the reduction in plasma lactate, respiratory rate, skin conductance, and cortisol, which of course is the major stress hormone, compared with just sitting with your eyes closed. So you're getting a very unique kind of stress reduction during TM. And comparisons of TM with other meditation techniques, with mindfulness and other meditation techniques, have looked at different psychological effects of different meditation techniques. This was a composite of negative emotions. So we're looking at changes in anger, worry, confusion, nervousness, felt inadequacy, distrust, guilt, suspicion, and frustration. On those variables, TM had over twice the reduction in this kind of this negative affect compared with mindfulness, which is the red bars, and other meditations, which are the green bars. This study, by the way, was a meta-analysis done in Germany. Now, one of the worst conditions of stress is PTSD. Everybody knows about this. And what I'm showing you here is the reduction in PTSD symptoms through TM in a number of different studies. The blue bars are showing what happens during TM. To get a feeling for the magnitude of the study, 0.8, which is just above the 1.0 line here, is considered to be a strong effect. On an average, TM had an effect size of over 1, which is considered a very strong effect. On the right-hand side, I'm showing the results for several studies on mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is the most widely practiced mindfulness technique. And basically, mindfulness produced about half the effect that TM does, an effect size of 0.5 compared with an effect size of 1 with TM. Now, here's a study in business and industry looking at stress reduction in a Fortune 100 automotive industry. And the study found that compared with the control group of people in the industry, that TM reduced tension on the job, it improved sleep quality, it improved work and personal relationships, it increased employee effectiveness, and it increased work and life satisfaction. So now I'm going to turn to the idea of collective consciousness. Maharishi has said that just as the consciousness of an individual determines his thought and behavior, so also there exists another type of consciousness for society as a whole, a collective consciousness for every family, city, state, nation, having its own reality and possibility of growth. The quality of collective consciousness of a society is a direct and sensitive reflection of the level of consciousness of its members. So the idea is that if you become more coherent by transcending, if your brain becomes more coherent, literally, if you have less disease, less stress, that influence is going to, of order and coherence, is going to be permeated throughout society and affecting other people, just as everyone else in society is affecting us. And here's a study that shows that as little as 1% of the population practicing TM, that it has a positive effect on the entire society. So in this study, in cities in which 1% of the population practice TM, you see a reduction in crime rate compared to the previous year. And the comparison on the right-hand side are control cities, which did not have meditators in the population, but otherwise they were similar in demographics, and they showed an increase in crime. So this has been replicated 50 different times in different studies. But what I really want to tell you is about the effects of large groups of experts, of meditators, and how they can diffuse tension throughout society. This would be the square root of 1% of people practicing not only Transcendental Meditation, but also the TM City group. And that's enough. If you have even the square root of 1% of a population, which is a fairly small number now, it can have highly statistically significant effects. How? Because, as we heard from Dr. Hagelin yesterday in the first lesson, and Dr. Nader, that experience of transcendence to the silence of our own consciousness is an experience of the unified field of natural law. It creates a highly coherent brain functioning, but it also sends a wave of coherence throughout the world, throughout society, which is the basis of creating societal peace. I want to show you 2 studies on this. This was the International Peace Project in the Middle East. This is me in 1983, and Dr. Charles Skip Alexander, who organized this study. We're standing on Mount Olive, where the group was created. The idea was to have a coherence creating group practicing TM and the TM City program and look at the effects on the quality of life in Israel and the war in Lebanon. That's the group, and this is the data. The quality of life index was made up of crime, accidents, fires, national mood, stock prices, war intensity, and war deaths, a very broad index of different things. What you're seeing in the graph is the change day by day in the size of the group. So the dotted line is going up, the group is getting bigger during this period. And what you see is that the quality of life, which is illustrated by the solid line, is tracking the size of the group. So it's like you turned a knob and turned up the coherence in society and the quality of life improved. You turn the knob down and the quality of life tanked. You turn the knob up again and it starts to rise, the quality of life, and so forth. It pretty much follows highly, highly statistically significant effect. And this study has been scrutinized in detail and has not been found to be explained by anything else except by the size of the group. We could discuss that more. Now, the last study I want to tell you about is a 17-year study on the effects of a square root of the US population on the TM and TM study participants on the quality of life in the United States. So these are the golden domes at MIU, which were constructed solely for the purpose of regular group meditation by the faculty, students, staff, and the community in Fairfield, Iowa. And the purpose is to create coherence for us individually meditating every day and for the university, but for the city and for the whole world, depending on how big the group is. So here's inside the men's dome. This just shows what it looks like. It's a very beautiful place. We have foam everywhere for sitting and meditating. This is inside the women's dome. Oprah's usually not there, but this photo was available, and so I stuck it in. And so this is the experiment. What we're interested in is what happened when the size of the group, illustrated by the blue line here, was around 600 or so, way below the threshold needed to affect the US population. This dotted green line at the top shows when you have, shows 1,725 people, which is approximately the square root of 1% of the people in the US at that time. And so what you see here is that starting around 2006, 2007, the size of the group started increasing. And the reason for that is that we had a grant from the Howard and Alice Settle Foundation to actually give people stipends to be in the group. And so the group size increased. It became a profession. A coherence creating became a profession. And then with loss of funding, or as funding got reduced, then the size of the group reduced. And the size of the group went back to pretty much what it was before, about 600. So the experimental question is, what happens during the experimental period compared to the baseline and compared to the post period? And like the experiment in Israel and many others, the hypotheses and the variables used were predicted in advance of the study. So this is not like we're looking for something to happen and, you know, wherever the arrow lands, we draw a target around it. This is saying we're laying out the target to begin with. So look at this amazing result of what happens on multiple social indicators. These different lines represent different quality of life measures: murder, rape, assault, robbery, infant mortality, drug deaths, vehicle fatalities, and children's death by injuries. And I must say that this study is a follow-up of research by Dr. Ken Kavanaugh and Dr. Michael Dilbeck, who looked at during the baseline and the experimental periods, and they showed that everything got better. This was published in a series of four published papers. And now this is a follow-up, which I'm doing with Dr. Kavanaugh and Dr. Dilbeck. Anyway, what you see here is that when we reach the threshold, which is the vertical dotted line here, amazingly, all of these indicators drop down at once. And then after the group began to be small again, shown by the blue line dropping down, the slope of the decrease became less. And when there was a rapid drop in the size of the group between 2013 and 2014, all of these indicators turned around. All of the positive effects were beginning to be lost. So what is the kind of significance of, you know, in terms of lives lost and quality of life? I did a regression analysis on each of these variables, and this is an example. The red line is a regression fitted to the baseline period. So you see it fits very well. And then we're projecting it forward into the future. And the question is, what actually happened compared to what would have happened if that baseline level had continued? And what you see is there's a divergence. It decreases, and then when the numbers drop down again in the post period, then we begin to lose the gain. And by the end of the post period in 2016, number of deaths, drug deaths, were back to what would have been predicted from the baseline again. So what's the magnitude of the effect? Well, we calculated the percent change during experimental and during post, and you can see the numbers here, but the estimated reduction in drug deaths averted was almost 80,000 fewer. And similar thing looking at aggravated assaults. Here we didn't have any significant regression during the baseline, so you just predict by its mean level. So the dotted line now is the average of the baseline. And you see that during the experimental and post periods, almost 1 million fewer assaults were averted. And similarly, robberies, 484,000 fewer robberies, rapes, 53,000, more than 53,000 fewer rapes, 158,000 plus children and adolescent deaths, almost 96,000 fewer vehicle fatalities, 31,730 infant deaths, and 28,533 fewer murders. So it's highly, highly significant effects and from practical point of view. The p-values for all of these, when you put it all together, is astronomically small. So what are we doing now? Obviously, during the COVID time, we can't have group meditation. So what we've been doing is having synchronized group meditations. And so this map just shows the synchronization when people are meditating at the same time in different parts of the world. And what I'd like to end with is show you a bit of this, a clip from this video put together by my friend Carla, which was from an event May 14th, just a week or so ago, of a worldwide group meditation. And what you'll be seeing in the video is people all over the world, and they're saying a similar thing in their language. Let me see if this loads, which is Vasudeva Kumbhakam. They are saying the world is my family in different languages, and then you'll see kids all over the world meditating together. So let me see if I can load that up.
शिक्षक प्रधानाध्यापक तथा अभिभावकहरूलाई हाम्रो विश्वव्यापी भारती ध्यानको सामूहिक ध्यान कार्यक्रममा सबैलाई हार्दिक स्वागत गर्दछौँ।
Eti huo tete amachani. Boma bakocha abiya abakangiriya abasonoli n'abadivosi okoti tugachetu echebilucha omoti wotosi.
Le monde est ma famille. Bienvenue à tous les élèves, enseignants, directeurs d'établissements scolaires et parents d'élèves pour notre méditation de groupe à travers le monde.
Мир – это моя семья. Добро пожаловать всем ученикам, учителям, родителям и директорам на нашу всемирную групповую медитацию.
Maailma on minun perheeni. Tervetuloa kaikki oppilaat, opettajat, rehtorit ja vanhemmat ryhmämeditaatioomme ympäri maailman.
Okay, so I'm going to try to come back into the picture here and in my presentation. If I could figure out how to do that, stop sharing. Okay, am I here?
Yes.
I hope I'm moving too long.
Yeah, no,
So I'm sure there's lots of questions. I made a lot of claims there.
We'll come to that. So thank you very much, David, for a very, very amazing, powerful presentation on So let's now move to, in the interest of time, because we want to have a rich discussion to come to some learnings from this whole group, right? So Dr. Travis, you're going to talk about what this fourth state or what transcendence is, and especially from the perspective of neuroscience. So please go ahead and share your screen.
Thank you, Anil. And thank you, David, for the very royal pace of going through TM, first as a technique for transcending, then how transcending helps the individual, and then to its larger effect in terms of society as a whole. It's very clear, it's very well done. Thank you. What I'll be doing is shining a light on transcending and transcendental consciousness, that it's a fourth state of consciousness. It's more than a momentary experience. It's more than a psychological experience. It's more than a mere feeling. It's actually a concrete state of consciousness. Now, how can we call a state of consciousness higher? We need some criteria. So one criteria, and we're giving you three. One of them is the sense of self should be more expanded than in other states. There's the identity of who you are should be much more full than other states. Second, the relationship between the subject and object should be fundamentally different. How you relate, your core of experience, the content of experience should be fundamentally different. And last, should be physiologically distinct. So for the first one, I asked my students to write down a description of their deepest experiences during their TM practice. There were 47 of them. I asked them to write 400 or more words. And I asked them not to use all the formulated phrases that they've learned during their classes, but to tell me the raw experience. What did it feel like? And then once I had that information, I did a process called content analysis, where you take a sentence and you collapse it down. What's the fundamental idea that this sentence is expressing? And then I saw how often these core ideas were expressed within a specific person and across people. And this is what we found. The content analysis yielded three fundamental themes. One is this experience, these deepest experiences during transcendental meditation practice, characterized by the absence of time. It's absence of space. It's the absence of body sense. It's that sense of self which is outside of time. It's a sense of self which is not 12 or 20 or 50 or 80. It's that sense of self which is underlying all those ages. It's outside of space. It's not confined to the human physiology. It's not confined to the house. It's that fundamental value of awareness, consciousness. So this is a larger experience of sense of self. But how does this experience, deep experiences during transcendental meditation, these experiences of transcendental consciousness, relate with waking, sleeping, and dreaming? So here we have a 2x2 grid. At the top is content. So content's thoughts, feelings, outer objects, body sense. What we see on the left, the rows are sense of self. So let's look at this bottom right-hand cell. No content, no sense of self. If you think a moment, waking, sleeping, dreaming, sounds like sleeping. That's sleeping. We have the saying in English, I sleep like a log. Sweden, they say I sleep like a stone. It's giving the same idea. There's no awareness, no sense of self, no sense of experience, or no content. How about this upper left content, upper left cell? Content, sense of self. So we have dreaming, we have waking. Yeah, this is waking. This is what you're in right now. There's content, the PowerPoint, visual, auditory input. There's what's going on in the room around you. What is the temperature? What is the air? What are you sitting on? Is it a comfortable chair? But also there's a sense of self. You're experiencing this from where you are physically, from where you are mentally. What else is going on in your mind? The sense of self comes together with content, and that's waking experience. Bottom left, I argue, is dreaming, where you have illusory dream images, constantly changing, very gripping to awareness. If there's a sense of self, it's very fragile. It leaves this upper right cell. No content, so no thoughts, no feelings, no experiences of the outside world, no body sense, but yes, sense of self. Now, if there's any psychologists in the audience, they'll probably say, you know, Dr. Travis, it's not possible. You know, it's just there. It's an artifact of the fact you drew this 2x2 grid, but That cell's not possible. How can you be aware of yourself if you're not aware of this inner-outer dichotomy? You know, I'm the inner experience and the world is going on out here. Now, this objection is coming from waking state, because in waking state, this is the nature of our experience. In waking state, we have sense of self and content. But this experience is the experience which David so clearly was describing, the experience of transcendental consciousness. This is the experience that the content analysis brought out. It's a sense of self outside of time, sense of self outside of space, outside of body sense. Notice this is a fourth state of consciousness. It's fundamentally different than waking, sleeping, and dreaming. It's not an altered state of waking. It's qualitatively different. In waking, you cannot have the experience of self, pure self-awareness without content. It's not sleep. Sleep has no content, but there's no self-awareness. And the state of transcendental consciousness has unique physiological correlates. Here we have blood flow in the brain during rest. We see decreased blood flow. The core of the brain, that's what governs heartbeat and breath rate and overall metabolism. That's lower, and that's why the body is slowing down. Also the front part of the brain. David talked about this. It's the part of the brain, it's the boss of the brain. It's the part of the brain that puts other things together. It's involved in thinking, moral reasoning, sense of self, short-term memory, decision-making. Blood flow is lower there. Why? Well, because you're asleep. What happens during TM is just completely different than rest. David used the word coherent rest, or we could call it restful alertness. Notice the brainstem blood flow is lower. The body feels very settled. The mind is quiet, but the front part of the brain, blood flow is higher. That part of the brain, which is the orchestra, conductor of the rest of the brain, blood flow is higher there. And this blood flow is not indicating increased doing, but it's indicating increased being, just wakefulness itself, wakefulness in the midst of deep silence. If we look at the brain waves during TM practice, this is what you see. The x-axis is time. Each column is a second. The y-axis, the letter number combinations, are different points on the brain where you record brain waves. And this is the actual electrical activity that you can see during TM practice. Notice the brain waves here. What they're doing is they're going up and down together. You see that? This is what coherence means. The electrical activity is going up and down together because those two parts of the brain are involved in the same task. So they have a similar electrical signature. And the so-called task is the task of being awake. Not thinking, not doing, not accomplishing, but the task of just being, wakefulness. So we see that this state, transcendental consciousness, is indeed a fourth state of consciousness. Self is more expanded than in other states. Fundamentally different subject-object relationship. It's qualitatively different, not seen in other states, and it's physiologically distinct. So this is, ivory tower, academic, gee whiz, isn't this great? But the point is, it has practical benefits. Due to the brain's nature to change, the brain's a self-adapting organ, transcendental state becomes an enduring trait. Let me show you. What we did, this is individuals coming, students coming to MIU, learn Transcendental Meditation as part of their first course, because we use experiences during TM as a way to understand global change in different disciplines. So we had individuals coming in, their eyes closed, that's the purple dot. This is a coherence with eyes closed. The lime green is doing a reaction time task. They were all trained in TM, and now 2 months later, this is coherence during TM practice. It's higher, and that's seen in study after study that coherence during TM is higher than eyes closed, because in eyes closed, even though your eyes are closed, you're thinking, you're processing, the mind's thinking about what it's going to do after the research and so on. But notice, even in just 2 months, there's a change in coherence during eyes open. 6 months, 12 months, what we find is the same levels of high coherence during TM practice. This is that state being experienced, a transcendental state. But then we see it beginning to coexist with eyes open processing. This is transcendental state becoming a trait. Now notice 2, 6, 12 months, the individuals have similar levels of brain coherence. This was a surprise to me, but after thinking deeply, what is it that conducts the process of the mind to transcend? You learn to use the natural tendency of the mind to grow, to expand. It's not a process of expectation, of control, of evaluation, of directing mental functioning. It's not a process of concentrating and controlling the mind. With TM, you learn how to allow the mind to take its natural direction. First, you give it the inward direction, and then you let go. And the natural tendency of the mind will take the mind within. Because it's a natural process, additional practice doesn't make it go that better. We've seen in this longitudinal study, this is random assignment, college students, 50 in all. The 2 columns are left are pre-test, the 2 on the right are post-test. Brain integration is that integration of the EEG during TM practice. Alpha 1 is David brought out, along with the EEG of activity. And we see this growing. This is showing the state of the transcendent becoming trait. My last slide looks at brain integration in terms of larger sense. This is bringing this talk back to the theme of the conference, consciousness-based management and leadership. This is work with Harold Harung. What we reasoned is people who are successful in their career, they're able to deal with stress, they're able to come up with creative solutions, they're able to see what's the future trends of whichever area they're in. So they should have higher levels of brain integration. So we looked at 66 athletes. Everyone participated in World Games, Olympics, National Games. The so-called world-class athletes are those that finished in the top 10 for 3 seasons in the competitive career. We see higher levels of brain integration in the world-class athletes versus controls. Looked at top-level managers. Managers, CEOs for 18 years or longer, the company had grown. Also, the company was socially responsible. We found increased levels of brain integration in our top-level managers compared to controls. And we asked the managers, what's your secret? How come you're so successful? None of them said, I worked harder. None of them said, I'm smarter. What they all said is I could trust my gut instinct. I could trust my intuition. This is a very practical description of what does it mean to be more in tune with your inner sense of self, your more universal nature. Because that part of you is closer to the waves of energy, intelligence, of creativity that's guiding life all around you. If you can pick up your action from that point, it would be more successful. The last are classical musicians, professional and amateur. Both have high levels of brain integration because playing music from a child rewires the brain. And I think that's what we're seeing. The last 2 bars here are coherence in short-term TM practitioners and long-term. Short-term is 7 years, long-term is 24 years. I put this up here not to suggest, boy, if you meditate, if you practice TM and you transcend regularly, you're going to become a great musician and a great manager and a great athlete. No. That takes development, specific skill development. But the point I'm trying to make is what transcending is doing, it's exercising the brain in that way of functioning that's seen in highly successful people. It's allowing your brain, which is the interface between you and the world around you, to give a more global, more complete picture of the world around you so you can be more successful. Here's my summary slide. I'll let you read it. So this transcendental conscious we're talking about, again, is not a fanciful, fleeting inner experience of feeling good or whatever. It's actually a fundamentally different state, fundamentally, qualitatively different than waking, dreaming, and sleeping. And the effect on brain functioning from this experience is the basis for better planning and decision-making. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you for inviting me, Anil.
Thank you, Dr. Travis. That was one rocket after another. Wonderful, great content in a short period of time. And let's now go with Dr. Carla Brown, another rocket of a sort of wonderful research. So Dr. Brown, and she teaches in the TM, also the medical school, and does fantastic research. It's very different flavor. Dr. Brown, please go ahead. You can share your charts.
Here, I'll share my slides. Okay. I am a professor at Loyola University, Chicago Stritch School of Medicine, and in medical education. And we offer an elective to our students. Dr. Stixford, who's one of our lecturers, talks about how stress is caused by lack of control. And this student, Bailey Swan, University of Illinois medical student, third year, said that TM was absolutely critical for her in handling medical school, became very critical for her, and also in the pandemic. And Sebastian Collage, a student, first year student this year, talked about how TM imbued him with a greater sense of preparedness in any situation, reinforcing his confidence and trust in himself as he entered his examinations. This reminds me of what Dr. Travis just said when he was talking about the high-performing individuals. Sebastian is a high-performing person. About, 15 or 16,000, maybe 20,000 people apply for medical school to the Loyola School of Medicine. About 166 enter. But we find that students are struggling with a very challenging curriculum, with family events and so on. And Sebastian shared in his paper, and he gave us permission to share that, he had some issues. And, one of those is he really wanted to do the things with his family that he was always doing. And he had some issues in speaking. He has a little bit of a stutter, but with TM, he found that he was gaining very much control over his mastery of the curriculum. And he also even applied this to his idea of what it would mean to be a physician in the future. Equipoise and gentleness can elicit a more complete medical history, allowing the physician to gracefully and elegantly search through the many synapses of his or her brain to arrive at a likely diagnosis and treatment plan. I believe the secret lies in mental interconnectivity or coherence. So he's picking up on what Dr. Travis taught him, and he's experiencing it as well as understanding it. Our next slide is talking about a student who's got a lot to deal with. And she said that she's the definition of stress, unfortunately, for her friends and for her family. And that this is a burden on her mind and heart, but that TM has helped alleviate the stress. So she had headaches, she had high blood pressure, and she was suicidal. But as a result of TM, she felt empowered. And every year, we hear from somebody who says, I'm really glad that I'm not going to be, as a result of TM, a statistic, which is what this is referring to. This is a very serious situation. And it's very wonderful to hear from students that they're able to overcome this. Students find that they're able to listen better, they're more forgiving of themselves in these circumstances. And as Dr. Orme-Johnson pointed out, the reductions in anxiety are significant. So everything that he saw in the companies that he was talking about has occurred for these students as they prepare to become physicians. They describe being more efficient, procrastinating less, solving ADHD, and enjoying their demanding study. This is a picture of a group of students at a retreat with Dr. Orme-Johnson. And one of these students stood in front of the class and said, I'm going to say something to you which nobody ever says. I had a very poor score. I doubled the score after my retreat. This is where TM gets teeth. So anybody who's practicing TM has access to such a retreat. So increased meditation has the ability to remove even deeper stresses. And our students really love this. So the students started reporting that they have improved board exams as a result of TM. And the deans are reporting that the students who are coming from underserved or at-risk populations are really able to marshal their resources because of TM. They're very deans are very passionate about this, and I'm really excited to see all students take off as a result of TM. And one of the students here is describing becoming a better human being, feeling empowered and self-actualized as a result of TM. This is a picture of Dr. Travis with one of our students, Jessica, and they are so excited to have a hands-on demonstration of their own brainwave coherence as a result of TM. Our students are very grateful for this, and this is a student who matched in neurosurgery, and she was meditating all 4 years, Danny Terrell. And she said, this is something that Loyola has given the students that other medical students don't receive. One of the doctoral students at MIU, Marie Loisel, joined us and conducted her doctoral dissertation, and partly under the guidance of Dr. Travis and Dr. Sandy Nidich, and I was helping her, and there's a paper that's being prepared showing significant reduction in burnout, depression, and insomnia. It was a mixed method study with physicians talking about what a significant impact TM had in their life. Now we're looking at the study that Dr. Orme-Johnson showed you earlier. So I don't need to go through this critical experimental test of the impact of TM and the TM cities on this war in Lebanon, 82-83. I mean, step back for a minute and think about what this meant for that region, especially when Dr. Orme-Johnson went through the results of the large assembly in Iowa and the enormous reduction in suffering that occurred. This was followed by another study of 7 incidents, large assemblies of these groups over time were measured against the quality of life and indications of war-related injuries, levels of conflict and cooperation. And this study was basically suppressed. My doctoral dissertation had to do with examining what the policy community in Washington and around the world, the policy community associated with the Middle East, how they looked at this research. And I showed them this exact study, a summary of the study, and also the 38-page write-up of the study. I looked at how they evaluate research in general, how they looked at information in the course of their work. And this was such an extraordinary process for me that there was one gentleman, I was just going through some of my notes on the study. He made me turn off my recorder. He practically jumped in the middle of the desk. I mean, people had what I call a limbic scream. They couldn't understand this research, or not everyone was like that, of course. And so that's what I was looking at. What did they do to weigh this results of this study? My doctoral advisors really liked my study, but one of them had already found that when people look at research, they weigh the quality of it, they weigh the utility of it, and sometimes, and the relevance, and they decide whether they're going to look at it in the future. So I was looking at what was the likelihood that they were going to look at it again in the future. Now, I'm not asking you to parse this chart. This is as my husband pointed out to me, this would take about a half an hour to explain it all to you. But I looked at 35 people. Some were less likely to look at it in the future, and then some were more likely to look at this in the future. And there were a lot of reasons why, which are the little colored dots. And what it boils down to is that within the review process, you see Harrington and Moore over there. There are 2 reviewers. These are anonymous. These people are anonymous, but they evaluated the research one way. And then there was kind of a storm of critiques that occurred. And then they were less likely to look at it again in the future as a result of the critiques back and forth. And there were a handful of people over here in the most likely and likely category who were likely to look at the research, and they overcame their perceived religious or spiritual challenges or prejudices or assertions that social science is not helpful, or that it was politically difficult to look at it, or they might even fear political reprisal if they really looked at it. You know, there's some things you're not supposed to do, read, or say. But when you have something that resolves suffering to such a degree, what if it's true? What if it's true? Should we continue to look at it? One of the people that I talked to in that group of people was, I named her Barbara Roth. And she said, I can't afford to be closed-minded to this. I can't afford to not look at it. And so there was that group of people who tended to have this kind of point of view, who really, it was not politically a problem at all, had no problem looking at the research or continuing to look at it. I think those people, the thing that really distinguished them is that they worked on the ground and they knew what the suffering was, and they knew what people have to go through in those war-torn areas and with that violence and so on. And it was fascinating to look into peer review and see that some of the people, peer reviewers, even though they could not explain why this was happening, felt that this research was so well conducted, so well written, even with a few readings, they knew that they had to give it the same merit and they had to publish it. So there's a lot to discuss here, and I think we might be out of time. So just one point I would raise, we're at a point of pain in our society where people might think about this more. As Ray Dalio said, this might be an opportunity to look at new solutions. Mr. Dalio, who has been funding and helping with the David Lynch Foundation, and we're 700 of his people in Bridgewater, the largest hedge fund in the country, where he has provided some payment for them for this instruction in TM, and where they've provided it as well, where these people have, of course they've helped. He talks about how TM has helped him in his career and why he did this. And that principle that he had, we should look at things like the Maharishi effect. So I think we have an opportunity to gain a lifetime tool for mastery of life, which is the TM technique described by Dr. Travis Orme-Johnson, and to help our employees fulfill their needs, which also helps our clients, helps our bottom line, to change wellness and to improve society. So if you have any questions, you can ask them now. I think Anil is going to make that happen. But I also wanted to give you my email address in case you wanted to be in touch, or you can go to tm.org.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Brown, Dr. Travis, Dr. Orme-Johnson, for a scintillating sort of display of the power of transcendence. We saw just towards the end, there's the thing of transcending, and there's acceptance of it or resistance thereof. We talked of transcendence at the individual level of the benefits, and the benefits at the social or collective level, organizational level. And we looked at some psychological benefits, right? And then also the neurological footprint and all neurological benefits. So these are some three basic sort of, I thought, some distinctions out there. I think, where do we go from here, right? The question was, and I think Carla, you said very much, where do we go from here? It's an opportunity. But before I go, I have a theory called V theory of transcending. I would like to take a minute to just share with everybody that V theory. Just shows very simply what transcendence is. And it builds on this idea of what we call V theory, that has been sort of a U theory that has going around in our MSR, lesser management, spirituality, religion literature. So I thought, if there's U, well, V comes next to it, and U is a long process, V is faster, V for Vedas, and V for victory, V for all of us together, like WEV. So I just loved the word we, and I just decided to make it into a we theory. Okay, it should show up, load up in a moment. The idea is that what is the fundamental distinction that we need to understand when we think of transcendence, which is that there is that surface level living, and there is that sort of transcendental level living. Okay, so I don't know what you see, but this is what it is. What is transcendence been explained, but I could say when consciousness is left free to experience itself, that's transcendence. It's self-transcending. The transcendence is the absolute, non-changing, non-variable. So there is a transcendent where you go to, and unboundedness of life, which is inner core of everybody's life, which is what we touch when we transcend. So transcend to where? I don't know if we answered that. Transcend to where? That's the question I'm going to answer. The intellect becomes aware of itself to transcending itself. So it's a self-referral process because you're knowing yourself through yourself. Nobody else is telling you about anything. And by direct, unmediated experience, one can realize that the true self is beyond time and form, beyond thought objects. It's unbounded. So this is the basic distinction I like to draw when I present to management communities, that at one level, we are pure being, at another level, we are individual human beings. As you can think of as a wave and particle, at one level it's just wave function going everywhere, and at one level we are like little particle billiard ball. There's only so much we can do and what we are. These states Dr. Travis explained. So here is my theory. We, shape we, that means at some level we are living a surface reality, like we are talking, waking state of consciousness. You're you, I'm me, and sort of we have, and there's a thing, and there's me, all that stuff, and that sort of think of as waves on an ocean. And then zoom, we just kind of zip into using some technique, but you got transcend to the absolute, right? So do you think there is something called absolute? And then what is that absolute from relative? It's a consciousness, the unified field of consciousness, which is all the laws of nature. And it's not difficult. We are consistent and we are formed of all the laws of nature, even though we are visible forms, but we are the laws of nature because we are consistent with electromagnetic laws and gravitation laws and every other law. So that laws are accessible to us. So we just go, and through transcending means we go to that infinity, which is within us effortlessly. Isn't that amazing? You can get everything by doing nothing. Just sit and just follow a technique. And then you stay there, you get energized, you get some negative entropy, you lose some of your confusions and all that stuff, clarity. Your thoughts become from gross and gross and gross to like finer and finer, at which very quickly just they vanish. That thoughts come, you don't care. And then we'll stay for some time, drink in negative entropy, more order, and then you come back out. So when you move out, you're a little bit farther, you're forward, you're sort of more energized, more calm. Something better happens. So if you are from the left to the right, you move ahead, but in many, many ways in terms of inner energy, inner productivity, and all of that stuff. So a lot of the research I think was presented. I just wanted to show this simple model, and I love this V theory because U theory is very popular in our MSR literature as a way of social change, and I think this V theory is faster way of social change. All right, so that was my three charts. All right. Now I described those distinctions, etc. So I think it's at some level. Where do we go from here, right? What is the path ahead? So I would say that if I had to summarize, like if this is an intentional conference, we want to be able to come up with this takeaways. What are the takeaways? Let's say there's a micro level, there's a macro level. At the micro level, individual level, you can get health, you can get well-being, you can get personal productivity, or even small group level, a family level. You can get all of that stuff. Learn the technique. I'm calling transcendence. Yes, we talk of transcendental meditation here, but all power to you if you find a powerful technique just as powerful to transcend. And then, so that's one benefit at the micro level, and then it shows different physiological benefits, neurological footprints, all of that stuff you can beautifully was described. And then there's a macro level, which is that we come to the unbounded consciousness through collective transcendence, create a laser beam effect. We inject creativity or positivity or coherence into the fabric of society, and then that level sort of percolates through everything. And so it's a field paradigm, field effect kind of thing, right? So that is the other takeaway points. At collective consciousness, we don't sort of work one-on-one, or billiard ball, but create a condition in which a wave in which sort of everybody flourishes. those are the two things. Now, the third thing is what Dr. Brown said, which is, where do we begin now? Where do we make the next change? And I think you referred to mostly medical professionals, but same thing could be done with management professionals, other professionals who are in lead of society and who can sort of influence and be confident enough to recommend this to people they love. So I would like to open this question, where do we go from here to produce a flourishing humanity? Right? We've presented all the evidence. I mean, how much evidence more need? People want double. I would love society to say, okay, produce these many studies, then we will buy into it, right? Whatever the number is, then we can get that done. All that, then it's a matter of just funding, right? And then more researchers. But don't say, well, oh, just give us some numbers, just give some bar. We'll cross that, I feel. So more on where we go. So let's start with anybody. Dr. OJ, maybe you start.
Yeah, sure. Okay, since you said me first. Well, Maharishi set out a plan. And it's basically very simple. Create the square root of 1% groups for every level of population. So the first thing would be every continent should have a group for the whole world. What does that mean? A group of about 8,000, 10,000. Efforts towards this are happening around the world. They're trying to create such a thing. And then to have a group for every city, for every country, they have their square root of 1% effect group, and then for every city, and then for every town. So that would be sort of the ultimate thing. But to begin with, it's just to have big groups on every continent. So that's one plan. Another plan has been the synchronized meditation, and I kind of showed that. And Maharishi we have been establishing these time zone capitals. So every time zone should have a big group, and they all meditate, say 8 in the morning, they meditate 8 to 9 or something like that. And as the earth turns, it's always becoming 8 o'clock, say in the morning somewhere, and coherence. So this wave of coherence is sweeping around the earth, constantly like that. So that was another idea. And then what I showed you now, the thing we've been doing during this COVID time, is having people just meditate at the same time. It's very difficult to assemble groups. Schools have to disband. But the groups can be created in any venue. It could be medical students. Most of the big groups are with students in schools. The problem with that is on summer vacation they go, and coherence drops down. So you want to keep a consistent group. That's one sort of situation. But in some countries, like in Ecuador, the military have instituted in big groups. In other places, the police. It could be prisoners. It could be retired people. It could be the military, and it could be even disguised, you could say, as some other project. Because, for example, PTSD, you could implement soldiers or veterans to meditate for PTSD relief, but if they meditate together, they're also a coherence creating group. So anyway, that's sort of all these different ways it could be implemented.
I promised I'll ask you that question because see, there's a community. We know this transcendental meditation. We made a transcendental approach to oneness. I did not call it purposely the TM approach to oneness and whole, because that would be just talking to ourselves.
Right.
Maharishi said, and it's been said in scriptures, you can transcend on almost any sense thing, right? Tell me a little bit about why TM is better. Why good music, good humor, good poetry.
Well, I wanted
anything help? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
right.
I think what we've been discussing is leveraging the capacity that every human being has. So every human being has this amazing capacity, and every society has the capacity to prevent actual violence and war. So that the 60 studies that have been published on the Maharishi effect, they document it. Just like we know that we need to get, to electric vehicles. We need to get out of carbon emissions. There are various things that we know, and there have been there's resistance to some of these changes that society needs to make. So I think the solution is that people who want to help run to help, and they bring their resources, they bring their friends, They join these groups, they practice transcendental meditation for themselves. And the reason that TM is more effective is because of this. I'm going to let Dr. Travis talk about it, but this element of transcending being the most effective. Dr. Travis?
Unmute, please. Unmute, yeah.
Dr. Brown. Thank you, Dr. Brown. Yeah, theoretically, you can transcend through any sense because that field of pure consciousness isn't the source of senses, it's the source of the mind. So it's there. The key point is, what is the efficacy of getting there? And you can get there through arduous concentration, hard work, fasting, controlling your lifestyle. That will get there eventually, because what you're doing is you're purifying the physiology to be able to maintain that state. What's special about TM is that it uses a natural tendency of the mind. So you get there virtually instantly. When you learn Transcendental Meditation on the first day, you have that experience. It doesn't really take minutes. It definitely doesn't take years, days, weeks, minutes. It happens almost by itself, because that's where the mind wants to go. All of the people listening, even though we've been trying to be very engaging and interesting, about half the time, signs will find your mind has wandered. What are we going to have for dinner? I'm going to call so and go to the movie. What does this person really mean? It's part of what the mind is doing. It's going from focus to expanded, but this expanded vision is in the limited field of the outer world. What we do with TM is we allow the mind to turn within, and it continues to expand. That the mind doesn't like boundaries. It doesn't like restrictions. And this inner field of silence is free of boundaries. It's lively, it's creative, it's vital. So given the right direction and letting go, that's what you'll find. And this is this uniqueness of TM. I don't like to use good, better, best, because that's evaluative of it. But we have to appreciate that different meditation traditions have different procedures and they have different effects. And one of the different effects is other meditations require you to control the mind, be it Zen, keep your attention on one experience or keep the attention on one part of the brain. Don't let the mind move. When it moves, bring it back. Focus on the breathing so that what fills your awareness is your diaphragm going in and out. You lose sense of self, you lose the body. What's left is a diaphragm going in and out. These are all involving localized focus, controlling the individual mind. What you see is a part of the brain that has to do with how much effort you're using. It's called the default mode network. It's saying, okay, you're focusing your attention, you're keeping it on a specific object. With TM, this brain marker of how much effort you use show that it's an automatic process. Other meditations, this default mode network is in one state, TM, it's in another. So it's important that we don't think of good, better, best. And it's important that we don't try to think all meditations are the same. It's important we respect the different traditions. And in that respect, we appreciate the differential aspects of it.
Thank you.
I have a point, Anil.
Please go ahead, sir. Yeah, absolutely.
The general thing is that the brain is always transcending. And one great study that Dr. Travis has done has shown that when we make a transition and fall asleep, we go from waking to sleeping or go from dreaming to waking or back and forth, you go through that same transcendental state. It has the same EEG as you see during TM. So everybody throughout their life has been going through cycles of waking, dreaming, sleeping, and they've been slipping through that transcendence. The thing is being able to hover in that. Usually you're only there a minute or so. And sometimes people are aware of it and sometimes they're not. Sometimes people wake up in the morning and before they're fully ready to get up or anything, they feel they're in this glowing, wonderful state. What is this? And you want to have that. But besides that, there's always this inward and outward stroke, which is transcending in literature, for example, or in music. There's this flow, like in a Beethoven symphony. It's active, and then it becomes silent. Da 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 da, and then that the whole audience watching that suddenly or listening to that suddenly transcends, and I think that sends a wave of coherence out through society. Or you mentioned humor. Maharishi once gave a great talk in which he explained that what the humorist is telling a joke and he's leading you along in a story, and then he kind of pulls the rug out from under you with the the punchline, and the mind falls into the transcendent, and that's what creates the bliss. So all of these different things in life, basically everything we love to do, a wonderful sunset, being in nature, the poetry, the transcendentalists of Emerson and Thoreau, they had their means of transcending, but it was poetry, it was going into nature. And it's not as complete and not as systematic as TM, it's just simply falling into that. It has a very powerful effect. I think that this, literature and music has been holding society together by creating the coherence in collective consciousness, rituals, from the very primitive times, people dancing together, singing together. It's creating a level of transcendence. So it's all about transcendence. And one last point is that when you practice TM and you just sort of slide into that, and it like greases the skids of sliding into that. And after that, everything you do, read a book, read poetry, read a textbook. I found one of the first things in the first week or so when I learned TM, I started comprehending things better. And I'd open up my statistics book from graduate school. Oh my God, I not only understand it better, I see this guy had a sense of humor. I never saw that before. And so everything becomes deeper, more meaningful. You listen to music, you begin to appreciate on that very silent level from which it's coming. And you're down there in the groove with the musician, just really, and you're creating that coherence, which is increasing their performance. So what TM does is it's just a very simple way to just purely drop into that and come out, hop into that, which trains the physiology to do that, and then life becomes better. Everything is more enjoyable because everything is about transcending. So the more deeply we transcend, the better.
Thank you. Anybody else wants to add to that? Because otherwise I'm going to bring to the closing, not a question, but a proposition, and see how you respond to that. So this is an intentional conference. This is all motivated by creating world peace, creating flourishing humanity, right? Even though we enjoy each other's company and listening, but the purpose is there is a direction. And one of the things, first thing was, what are some of the universal principles of flourishing? And yesterday, after hearing 1 day worth of sessions, and it's got reinforced today, which is that flourishing has a little Damru kind of thing, which is like hourglass kind of model, because there's a whole couple of sustainability sessions. We're talking about, happiness, everything you want is be with nature. They say, why is clear, why we should connect with nature, because that's like obvious why you want to connect with tree and be with the dog, whatever. But find techniques, right? The idea is to connect with nature and broaden your perspective or knowledge of your larger world, etc. But then they also said, well, you need to also be able to connect inside, right? And have the inner field. And I thought if you transcend, then you go into infinity. So you expand the infinity on the outside with connection with nature larger and larger, and then connect as an individual, you're like a one person, but inside, again, there is infinity of consciousness. So to me, it's like the outer expansion supports the inner expansion, and inner expansion supports the outer expansion. Would that be, you think, is a good general overall principle for flourishing? I'd like for each one to go, please. Say yes.
Generally,
I'll say
yes, because what happens is the nervous system can function through some range. So if you just go to the outer part and you don't add the inner, the range of the nervous system will be functioning the same, and you'll just be overwhelmed by all of this activity outside. So that's why it's key to take the attention within, transcend, and experience infinity inside, and then go out and focus very deeply. And fundamentally, what you're doing is you're expanding the ability of the nervous system to register experience. Because what you're pointing to is so key, Anil. We want to have them both together, because the parts by themselves are fragmented, they're distracting, there's no growth, there's no wholeness. The transcendent by itself is wonderful, but it's not active, it's not dynamic, it's not useful. But when you put them together, suddenly the part has meaning relative to the whole. So I think it's going the back and forth, which is so key. And that's why with our TM practice, we meditate in the morning. We don't meditate for hours, 20 minutes, and then dive into activity. Forget that you meditated. Don't try to protect any fine feeling level, but go very deep, become a medical student. And then afternoon, protect your time, give yourself the time to transcend, and then back into focus activity. So that's a small caveat I would add to what you said.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. Yeah. Next, Carla, you were saying raise your hand.
Well, I want to say that reinforce that we want to take advantage very efficiently. And that's what the medical students are finding, because they're young. There are many ways in which they have been enjoying life, as Dr. Orme-Johnson is pointing out. But when we're faced with the problems in our society that we have, this is the time to take recourse to the most efficient way of transcending and to the most efficient way of accessing the capacity that the society has to eliminate war, violence, crime, and increase the quality of life. Just consider that we can change the policy community in probably a couple of weeks. That means the policy environment around solving these problems, if we had one of these large groups intact again in the United States. And we've been talking about having one in the center of the United States at a new university. And this could, and of course, strengthening the group at Maharishi International University.
Yeah, Carla, what can I say? Carla was alluding to a principle of collective consciousness of Maharishi, which is that government is the innocent mirror of collective consciousness. So that gives real meaning to the whole thing of we, the people. You know, we take this as self-evident that every person is created equal. Well, it doesn't mean much on the relative level. People are different, they have different abilities, they have different levels of society. But on the level of transcendent, we really are created equal, and we all have that potential. And so whatever the mode of government, the basic thing to make that system work better, whether it's communism or democracy or a theocracy or a monarchy, is to increase the coherence of the people. And so every government, whatever its mode of organization, it should provide education to give this tool of transcendence to the people, or any evidence-based tools like that create transcendence. That should be their first line of duty, and it'll create whatever their mode of government. It'll make things work better. The government will work. It's not so much the structure. It's not, you know, we're going to make everybody into democracy. That may not be the greatest way to do it. Maybe any of them work fine if people were coherent. And you know, Maharishi said that the style of government is the emergent property of the level of coherence. So if the people are completely incoherent, unruly, they're every man for himself rather than seeing other people's point of view and having the idea that cooperating is much more powerful than fighting with everybody. But if you have incoherent people, then you get a very repressive government, because that's the only way to create some kind of order in society in that chaotic situation. So one takeaway is that a measure of how coherent or incoherent a government is the number of lawyers and the population. I don't want to insult lawyers, but it's just, you know, it's sort of, you have more prisons and more police and more more military if it's chaotic. And ultimately, if you had an enlightened society, enlightened people, basically you wouldn't need government. There would be sort of very minimal sort of organizing things. The military would be there, but mainly do parades, you know. And there'd always be something, but so that's the key. And every government, every person, leader in the world should know that.
Yeah.
But here's this tool.
Thank you, David. I've been to the last few years, I've been to Academy of Management, and a lot of people attending would be from Academy of Management, or colleagues from the management, spirituality, religion community who've kind of co-sponsored this conference. So thank you all for joining also. And this, I hope, gives you a good understanding of the very, very rigorous research, the quantity, the quality, the measures, and different setting, how many universities and how many journals, different angles. It's all very rigorous research that we do. So please learn to transcend, and we will have one more learn transcending, because so first of all, please fill out the survey. If you found it boring, just let us know. If you found it exciting, just let us know. If you want us to do something better, so I think our team members have been posting the survey link. We really appreciate that. Thanks for joining. One more thing is that we have a session coming up. The next session, this was session number 8, and the next one is on dialogic approach to oneness and flourishing, right? The thesis is that your words have more power than you think, right? And how that words can shape. And we'll have some fantastic panel, again, for cross cultures, across everything. So we hope you guys, everybody can join that session also. It'll begin in an hour and a half, which will be 6 p.m. Central. So I want to thank everybody, and I would appreciate the feedback. I want to thank all the panelists, our great panelists. And anybody who has questions, please send me question in detail. I tell you, they will give you 10x detailed answers.
And thank you, Anil, for setting up this great conference.
Thank you.
For
Appreciate
being
it.
such a shining light of high coherence.
Thank you. You all very beaming, coherent people. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much.
All the best. All the best.
Bye-bye.